Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a real honor to actually join such a esteemed group of faculty for the real truth about health. I'm Dr. William Lee. I'm a physician, scientist, author, and I study food as medicine. But I have a background really in biotechnology, and what I'm going to do in the next hour or so is to walk you through how I've actually arrived looking at diet and health. And in terms of real truth, what I do is I follow biology, I follow physiology, I look at pathology because that's actually how we actually really do medicine and try to discover things with medicine. So I'm going to actually start by sharing with you the background of my world of eating to beat disease. This is sort of like an idea that I've actually had for about 30 years or so, but I only in the last decade began putting some serious investment in really doing the actual research itself. And what I've discovered about food and health is it's not just about the food, which is what we always hear about, you know, a superfood or a super supplement. It's really about how our bodies respond to what you put inside it. When you put something good inside it, our bodies respond in beneficial ways. When we actually put something harmful inside it, not surprising, it responds in negative ways. So what I'm actually going to share with you is sort of a slightly different way of looking at diet and health and nutrition, but from the lens of really how we actually design interventions in medicine. So without further ado, let me just kind of introduce the concept of food as medicine. Most of us have heard about this, but the real question is, where does this idea come from? Most people will attribute the term food as medicine or let food be thy medicine to Hippocrates, and that attribution is correct. It's only an attribution. We don't really know if Hippocrates said it, but I will tell you that in the time of Hippocrates, there were no sophisticated medicines. And so food was viewed very much as part of how we actually healed ourselves and stayed healthy. And that's really the spirit of it. This has got a long history behind it. But what's different now is that we actually have science. I don't need to actually say too much more about this picture, other than to say that it wasn't too many years ago that picnics at the White House were filled with the classic American cuisine, if you could call it that. And this is sort of the standard American or Western diet, as we call it. There is really no standard, but America is kind of a melting pot. But we actually associate comfort food, convenience food, industrialized food was sort of a general staple that we now know in 2021 is not optimal for our health. And we're beginning to actually figure out not just that plant-based foods are better for you or that seafood with omega-3 fatty acids are beneficial for you, but really why are they beneficial? And that's really I think the key point of what I want to make is asking the whys, not just the what, but the whys. And then there's also the hows. So this is actually from an editorial written by my friends and colleagues, Dr. Dariush Matsufarian, who's the Dean of the Friedman School of Nutrition at Tufts, and Dan Glickman, who is a former Secretary, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. And they remarked in 2019 that the food that we are actually promulgating is actually contributing to our bad health, and it's a leading cause of mortality. So, you know, when you look at a statement like this, it's really hard to internalize it because a broad statement may not feel like it applies to you. And what I want to share with you is that is something that has happened to us that's really made us reconceptualize our health. Now, this is actually a image taken from the 1600s, a painting of a family in Venice, Italy, where the Great Plague of Northern Italy swept through parts of Europe. And in Italy, people were seeing folks dying out in the street. They had no idea what was going on. So they all ran into their homes or stone homes. They locked themselves in. They were afraid to go out, and they were all waiting for the town crier to tell them it was safe to go back out into the village square again. Doctors were wearing these long beak-like masks. They were masked, and inside the mask was herbs that actually smelled nice. They didn't smell like death. There was oregano, there was thyme, there was rosemary, frankincense. These were the herbs to really mask the smell of death, but the doctors didn't really have a good understanding of what was happening either. And they milled around from family to family, tending to the ill, trying to minister to them the best they could, and yet people were still dying. So there was a lot of fear around. If any of this sounds familiar to you from our experience, collective world experience from last year, this is exactly the image I thought of when the lockdown happened in March 2020, as the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. We had no idea what was happening in the emergency rooms and the ICUs. We all had to lock down. We were not sure what to do. There was an order to wear a mask, but we didn't really understand the forms of transport, transportation of the virus. And people were either well, or they were sick, or they were dying, and we didn't really know what was going on. So what was amazing to me was that in 2020 and 2021, we were in the same situation that people during the Renaissance, and even before that, during the medieval era, were in, which is vulnerable to illness. There was, and still is, very few interventions for COVID-19. As there were back in the plague, there was nothing to do for the plague. And so here is humankind vulnerable to diseases that can actually spring up outside of the body as well as inside of the body. Those are the chronic illnesses that we talked about, the non-communicable diseases. And we don't have all the answers. And so people just don't know what to do. Well, in last spring in 2020, I decided that we actually did have something to our advantage, and that was science. And because I'm a scientist, I'm a vascular biologist, I wound up actually trying to figure out what I could do as a scientist to get at the bottom of this. And you're going to say, what does this have to do with eating to beat disease? I want to actually tell you a little story now of my journey within the last year and how I brought my career experiences through this to really try to help understand what was going on with the pandemic. And in so doing, having a sort of some doors open and light bulbs go on in terms of how we can actually do better to eat to beat disease. Now I'm showing you a partial list of things that were available to us in 2020 that we were looking for to be able to treat COVID. Vaccines, which only became available in 2021, antivirals, steroids, anti-inflammatories, and monoclonal antibodies. What are we missing here? What are we missing? We're actually missing food. And yet, before we had vaccines, antivirals, and all these other more sophisticated treatments, we were all going to the market, buying what we wanted to buy, shuttling it back to our homes, locking the door, and cooking it in front of with our families. And we all became reacquainted with our stovetops, our pantries, and our refrigerators. And the time we went out to the market was intended to be short bursts to seek and secure, and then bring it back in. Nobody wanted to go to the hospital. Nobody wanted to go to the doctor's office. And frankly, the doctor and the hospital had very little to offer. And this is where actually the idea of food actually joins this realm of fancy treatments, because Mother Nature actually has already laced into her foods a series of very sophisticated chemicals, natural chemicals, bioactives that actually influence the body's health defense systems. And although we are still working hard to find new treatments for COVID-19, in fact, food was the remedy that we were actually applying to our bodies to boost our health, prevent disease, treat diseases, and help to recover all along through the pandemic. And so that's a very important point, really, is that, this human experience that every individual on the planet experienced in 2020 led us to actually consider that hospitals and doctors didn't always have the answers, and yet we still had to eat. So what is it in foods that can actually be helpful to us? Well, take a look at these pictures that I took myself as I traveled around the world in my career. When I go to a city, the first thing I do is I will go to their local market, their farmers market, or in the case of Europe, their village market. And one of the things I love to do is to take in the sights and the sounds. The sights are colors. I mean, look at these beautiful colors. This is Mother Nature's cornucopia, rainbow. And the rainbow of fruits and vegetables reflects the diversity of bioactives that are actually present in these foods. In fact, most of the natural dyes that lead to these colors are, in fact, bioactives that help the plant to give the plant some survival advantage, whether it's a natural insecticide or an attractant for pollinators to come spread the pollen. But when humans actually made that step to pick up that food and eat it, those plant-based bioactives had a new job description. And that job was to actually interact with human cells because they have no choice. And our human cells have to respond in particular ways. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how does the body respond to food when we put stuff inside it? And why is it that some of these foods that we know, plant-based foods, are actually good for us? So that's what I want to share with you. Now, before I do that, I want to, like telling you that eating plant-based foods is healthy. No surprise. There's no light bulb that goes off in your head when I say that. But I want to give you a perspective that will actually, hopefully, open your mind to some new thinking. And that is that in the quest to develop new medications, biopharmaceuticals, we've actually also in parallel been coming up with lots of innovations of foods. And some of these things you will recognize: plant-based meats. You can grow meat in a tissue culture. You can print your food. There's microbiomics, precision nutrition, biosensors you can plant on your teeth, and lots of chefs are innovating things as well. But these innovations have been, which are now relatively new in food, have been going on in the biotech and pharmaceutical world for decades. And that's really where my background is. I started out by trying to take a look at targets in disease that we could actually develop biotechnology solutions for, so that you can pinpoint a defect and then you can actually design a homing missile to be able to actually spear and hit the bullseye and spear it right down the center. And that's really biotechnology. Now, in the last 20 years, biotechnology has produced more than 800 different types of treatments that have been approved by the FDA. These treatments all have been studied in cells, animals. They've been studied in humans. They've been looked at for safety. They've looked at dosing. They've looked at trying to isolate what types of diseases they're used for interventions. They've had endpoints. They've had critical looks of safety. And then they've actually had committees sitting around to review whether or not the body of evidence merited an FDA approval. And then, of course, it was safe. Now, nobody talks about foods being approved in this way, even though it's called the Food and Drug Administration. FDA's role for food has been traditionally mostly focused on safety. And thank goodness that they actually do that. But think about food efficacy. Who's going to be thinking about that? So that's what I want to introduce to you, because it's possible to study food as medicine, not just in a hand-wavy, slogan-y sort of way, but literally what I've done is to study food using the same preclinical and clinical systems as we use to study and develop drugs. And that's actually, I think, where the light bulb should be going off when I show you this. So before we talk about food, let's talk about how actually the body responds to things. Let's talk about biotechnology. There is a whole field of angiogenesis treatments aimed at the circulation, regenerative medicine, injecting stem cells. DNA modification is gene therapy. Microbiome is now is a hot area being looked at by innovators. And immunotherapy actually is one of the biggest breakthroughs for the treatment of cancer. In fact, it won the Nobel Prize in 2018. So each of these areas I have personally worked in on the biopharmaceutical drug development technology side of things. So I know a lot about taking a drug, a chemical or biological, looking at the systems you'd use to test it in, and then actually critically looking at, can we actually show an effect? Well, about 10 years ago, while I was doing this, I realized that there was something pretty amazing, because as a physician, my patients would always want to know what they could do to treat their disease, and I would write prescriptions and do referrals, sometimes get them into a clinical trial. But then before they left the office, they'd always ask me, hey, doc, one more thing. What can I do for myself? What should I eat? And I realized that most physicians do not have education in nutrition or have very, very little education in nutrition. And I felt that was wrong. I didn't have, I had so many other responses I could offer my patients and thoughts I'd offer my patients. But when it came to nutrition, I knew almost nothing. And so that's when I actually went back to realize that a lot of what we know about the body has come out of our drug development efforts. There's a lot of research that goes on in this space. That's what the NIH generally funds research in order to, with the quest of actually developing treatments or cures. But I realized that, while you could take a researcher and they can go online and order overnight some chemotherapy that would arrive the next day, and they could take a spoonful of that and put it into their experimental system. And within a few days or maybe even a few hours, you would know if that chemical that you ordered could actually be useful against cancer or some other disease. If you picked up the phone and called a pizza or a salad to be delivered to your lab, and asked that same researcher to study it, study the onions or the peppers or the mushrooms or the tomato sauce, there will be no way for that researcher that might be brilliant in studying cancer research would have no way of actually investigating what the activity was. And so that's really what I set out to do. Use the tools of biotechnology to really begin studying food so that food as medicine really becomes its own namesake. We're actually studying it in a sophisticated way. So now I want to share with you what we know about these systems. I'm going to start with angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is the growth of blood vessels in the body. We've got 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels in our body. And each of them takes oxygen from our lungs that we breathe and nutrition that we actually eat and swallow. This network delivers these elements to every single cell in our body. So this is really literally our lifelines in our body. And our body has to protect our health by making sure that these vessels are functioning in perfect order. That means that we have just the right number of blood vessels, not too few or tissues will die, not too many, or the blood vessels will start to feed disease tissues like cancer and other inflammatory diseases as well. And so our body has the ability to keep all the blood vessels in perfect balance, in perfect check. And while drugs can punch through, and although it can smoke and get rid of a whole bunch of blood vessels, or you can overgrow blood vessels, as it turns out, with food, you can't overgrow or undergrow. It's just basically like a gardener that basically trims the hedges to the perfect height every single time. And that's a really important thing to think about, because when we eat foods, we're actually either pruning or growing blood vessels as well. If we don't have enough blood vessels, you have a whole series of ischemic diseases that can result. And if you actually have too many blood vessels, those blood vessels can feed diseases as well. So here, when the balance in the body is upset, the balance of angiogenesis, which defends our health, when that defender is damaged, you either have too few or too many blood vessels, and you wind up having disease. And where do we see this the most? By the way, these yellow stars are exactly where they're already FDA-approved treatments, and we want to aim towards that healthy middle. Let me show you first an example where we can actually inhibit angiogenesis or stop extra blood vessels. Turns out that cancers hijack blood vessels because all cancer started as harmless cells in our body. In fact, every one of us who are watching this video actually has microscopic cancers growing, like pimples in our body. It's just natural. We have trillions of cells that are dividing. Some of them are going to make mistakes. Most of those microscopic cancers will be detected by the immune system and won't be able to grow because they don't have a blood supply. But when they actually figure out how to grow a blood supply, then the blood vessels can grow up. And it turns out, and this is research I've done, once a blood vessel touches a microscopic cancer, that tumor can grow 16,000 times in only 2 weeks. And the same blood vessels that are feeding the cancer can allow them to escape into the circulation. So anti-angiogenics, so cutting off the blood supply to a tumor, is an important way. Starving the cancer is a new way to actually treat cancer. And so this is actually how we discovered and tested those drugs that are FDA approved for angiogenesis inhibition or starving cancers. On the left, you're looking at a ring from an eagle's eye point of view of an aorta. That's the biggest blood vessel in the body. So this is actually in a laboratory in an animal system. And the aorta, inside that ring, are blood vessel cells that normally sit quietly. But once you drop some of the stuff that tumors release, fertilizer, you can kind of see this white starburst of blood vessels that are all growing out. In fact, if you were to inject one of those little hair fine strands on one side with ink will flow all the way through it and come out the other side. because it's actually a blood vessel network. Now, if you actually put a drug, and here on the right-hand side, you can see it's a drug called TNP 470. You slam down all those blood vessels, they can't grow. And this is how cancer therapies to starve cancers are developed, because you now know that you can cut off the blood supply to a tumor. And in fact, that same drug that I just showed you was tested in a patient. This is a patient, a CT scan of chest CT of a patient. The black areas are the lungs, the white oval in the middle is the heart. And you can kind of see on the left-hand side, inside those black half moon like areas are these little white spicules. That's metastatic cervical cancer. Okay, cervical cancer in a 40-year-old woman who spread to her lungs, metastatic disease. And she got that same drug that I showed you on the right-hand side of that aortic ring, where it shut down all the blood vessels. And 18 weeks later, you can see very clearly that by starving the tumor, by cutting off the blood supply, you prevent it from growing. So this is actually a very exciting thing. It's led to a whole new frontier of cancer therapy called anti-angiogenic therapy. I've been involved with this for the last 25 years. But now let me actually show you that question that I asked. Well, what if we weren't testing a drug? What if we were testing something from the garden or the farmer's market? So now let me show you the same tool that we use. Again, blood vessels that if you drop what tumors throw in there, they form the starburst. Now, instead of drugs, let's drop some stuff that we can extract from food. In this case, soy. The phytoestrogen, phytochemical that actually comes from soy actually shuts down all of the blood vessel growth. And by the way, there are no estrogen receptors in this system. So this is a non-estrogenic effect. And you can kind of see how powerful soy genistein is as an anti-angiogenic substance. Well, there's this urban legend out there that women who want to avoid breast cancer should stay as far away from soy as possible because of the phytoestrogen. Well, it turns out the phytoestrogen, the plant estrogen, looks nothing like human estrogen. And in fact, the plant estrogen blocks the human estrogen. It's kind of like Mother Nature's tamoxifen. And so that whole idea about avoiding soy is well-intentioned. It's kind of the right idea, but the wrong interpretation of the science. So what I've shown you here is that you can actually shut down angiogenesis. But the real question is, does this actually work in people? And here's a study of 5,000 women in Shanghai. It's called the Shanghai Breast Cancer Survival Study. And they actually studied soy intake as food, soy foods, in 5,000 women who already had breast cancer, most vulnerable population. Listen, if soy was going to hurt you, it's going to really hurt badly in women who already had breast cancer. They looked at breast cancer survivors, and they looked at how much soy they ate. And they found that those women who ate more soy had an almost 30% decreased risk of death from their breast cancer. And in terms of the women who actually survived breast cancer, those that had more soy also had a lower risk of recurrence, less blood vessels feeding the cancers to come back. Now, how much soy did you actually have to take? Well, it turns out you only need about 10 grams of soy protein a day in order to be able to get this effect. And that's about as much soy as you get in 1 cup of soy milk. Now, in Asia, there are so many different forms of soy: fermented, non-fermented, cooked, not raw. We tend to, in America, have a relatively limited repertoire. Maybe we have some tofu, maybe we have some soy milk, maybe we actually have some, they make soy cheese. But the reality is that there are many, many different types of soy proteins that are out there. And so based on what I showed you with that 5,000 patient study, the skeptic would say, well, it's always good to show one case, but how do we know that's true? Maybe that was just chance in 5,000 people. Well, that's when we do a meta-analysis, and this is 14 studies, 14 different studies you can see stacked up on the left. And all of these studies looked at whether soy was caused more death or helped to improve survival in breast cancer patients. And you can see very clearly, in no study was there actually soy causing more death. In fact, in all the studies, it actually improved survival. And so again, this is where food as medicine is studied using evidence, using science. I showed you the preclinical laboratory work. I showed you some clinical trials. Now I showed you some meta-analyses. This is how you actually do food as medicine. At least this is one way to actually do food as medicine I'm working on. Now, there are lots of foods with anti-angiogenic activity. I wrote a book called Eat to Beat Disease that Ben introduced. Please feel free if you want to look at lists and lists and lists, more than 200 foods I wrote about. in this case, this is a partial list of foods with anti-angiogenic activity. And I talk about that. Let's talk briefly about the foods that stimulate angiogenesis so we can actually help to counteract when we don't have enough blood vessels in the body, like in cardiovascular disease. And it turns out that barley and mushrooms and other foods contain beta-D-glucan, which actually is a soluble fiber that causes your body to upregulate, make more of natural fertilizer to grow blood vessels where it's needed. You need this for healing a wound. You need this recovering from a heart attack. You need this recover from a stroke. Now, this is actually the data from this research showing that if you actually tied off the coronary artery of a lab animal and gave them a heart attack, if you fed them the chow, the rat chow in the lab was made of pasta. The pasta wasn't made from wheat, it was made from barley, and the barley had beta-D-glucan. You can kind of see in the bar graph that the pasta eaters made from beta-glucan, which stimulates blood vessels, actually generated more blood vessels. And you can kind of see in that brown staining on the panel on the right-hand side, it's PBBG is pasta made with beta-glucan. You can see there's more blood vessels growing. So this is an example of something oral in an animal model, the same type of animal model we use to study therapeutic angiogenesis drugs in biotech development, and you can kind of see the results that we can actually get. Now, there's also a natural chemical called ursolic acid, and foods have that. It's often found in fruit peel, so apple peel, cranberry peel, peel of grapes. Not always easy to eat fruit peel unless you have it as dried fruit, like in a trail mix. You can actually eat a lot of fruit peel that way. But fruit peel contains ursolic acid, and ursolic acid has been shown to help prompt the body to respond by creating a natural chemical called nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide not only causes vasodilation, it's the same substance that Viagra causes your body to produce: bigger blood vessels, better blood flow. We know what Viagra does. And actually, foods with ursolic acid will also help to dilate blood vessels, and that stimulates new blood vessels to actually grow. Now, actually, when you feed animals that actually have their femoral artery tied off, and that's on the left, you can kind of see comparing. This is a rat, left to right. On that left-hand side, no blood flow. Look at the other leg, shown on the right hand side of the picture. Red blood flow. In the middle is the tail, good blood flow. Now, after 3 days of treatment with ursolic acid given by mouth, orally, you can kind of see, that's derived from fruit peel, by the way, you can kind of see dilating the blood vessels, growing new blood vessels, and protecting this from ischemia, or the lack of blood flow. So again, food is medicine. By the way, how do we know about these types of laboratory animal assays? Because this is exactly what we use to try to develop treatments for ischemic limbs or peripheral arterial disease. These are gold standard methodologies used for drug development. So that's my background. And instead of testing drugs, we actually test natural chemicals. Those chemicals are coming from food. And that's really what the interesting thing is. So here's a whole list of foods with angiogenesis stimulating activity. And anybody who's interested, if you come to my website, drwilliamlee.com, drwilliamlee.com, you can sign up. And I actually, because the research keeps on going, I actually release information about new findings on angiogenesis and foods and health all the time. I also have been teaching an online course about this with the latest information as well. Now, why am I taking all this time to talk about this right after I talked about COVID? Because last spring, I kind of got thrown into the fire to try to help figure out what was going on with COVID. And we got autopsy tissue from people who died of COVID. And we looked deep at the ultrastructural level. We saw that the coronavirus actually not only infects the lungs, it infects the blood vessels as well. So now I want to share with you something that very few people have seen, although we did publish it in the New England Journal of Medicine. But on the left-hand side is a normal, healthy lung with the beautiful blood vessels, that lace-like network. And if you squint, you can almost see that those blood vessels are surrounding an air pocket. So when we breathe in, the oxygen goes into that air pocket, that bubble, and then it gets absorbed by our blood vessels. And those blood vessels, 60,000 mile channel, delivers that oxygen to all the cells in our body. Now, one of the things we found when we actually looked at COVID is on the right-hand side here. infection by COVID, where the coronavirus infects the blood vessels, not just the lung, but the actual blood vessels of the body. They'll destroy the blood vessels. And this is why we wind up having these microthrombosis or tiny little blood clots. This is happening in the brain, in the heart, in the limbs, in the toe, in the kidney, everywhere. And when I saw this and we published it in the New England Journal of Medicine, it suddenly sent up a red flag that this, of all reasons, is why you don't want to get COVID. You don't want to get it and get it over with, because we believe that to some extent, this kind of damage is happening in everyone. Now, fortunately, blood vessels can repair themselves. As I showed you, the body kind of is able to get back to where it needs to be. But for some people, it doesn't recover. Now, these are pictures on the right-hand side from somebody who died of COVID. So this is the end stage. Now, before people die, though, I want to show you, we actually looked at blood vessels in living people. So on the left is a set of lungs of a perfectly healthy person. We've studied 1,000 of them. And what we're able to do is use a CT scan and slice by slice reconstruct all of their blood vessels. Red is tiny blood vessels, yellow is medium sized, blue is larger blood vessels. Remove all the other lung tissue. Now you're just left with blood vessels in the lung. And we can actually rotate this in 3D. It's pretty cool. It's kind of like the Jurassic Park of lungs. You can actually get these really beautiful models. And on the right-hand side, you can see what COVID does. This is a patient who actually had acute COVID, didn't die, not yet. And you can kind of see the virus is completely trashed and inhibited, destroyed some of these tiny, small blood vessels. So this is not just in people who died, but even people who suffered and people who were short of breath, continue to be short of breath. Now, fast forward from March to April and May when we were doing this work, over to July, August, September. Now we were seeing people who had recovered from COVID 6 months before, 3, 6, 9 months before, and now they're still short of breath. When they go to their doctor, the physical exam looks fine. They're moving their air. They sound like they're moving air in their lungs. They get a chest X-ray, looks fine. They get a CT scan, also looks fine. We take a look at the CT scan, and if you actually squint at the middle, this is a long-term COVID survivor. You can kind of see it's not quite as good as the left-hand side, not as bad as the right, but still not quite recovered yet. Now, this is what long-term COVID, we understand is happening in some of these patients with the long haulers with long COVID, or now it's called post-acute sequelae of COVID. But if you were to take a look at this picture, you still wouldn't actually know exactly how bad the damage was. So let me show you, we can actually go in with a computer and count the blood vessels. So on the left-hand column is the 3 sizes of blood vessels. Less than 5 is tiny, 5 to 10 is middle, yellow. The red ones are the small ones, and the greater than 10 are the blue ones. And because we've studied 1,000 lungs, we can kind of compare using that very patient I just showed you a slide ago in the middle. What percent of normal blood vessels were present in long hauler, long COVID? Okay, so with the tiniest blood vessels, those red ones, only less than 50% of normal. In the middle one, less than almost 80% deficient, only 20% of normal. And of the larger ones, I'm missing 70%, only 30%. So I'm actually in the middle. Let's try to figure out what can actually be done to try to help prevent this, to treat this, and also to help people recover. And one of the big questions is, can we use diet? Can we use angiogenesis to really try to help people recover? So there's also additional complications where long COVID people's teeth are falling out. This is actually from a patient advocate whose son had a tooth fall out completely. And it turns out that in the gum of the tooth are blood vessels and nerves, and it's rich with that receptor that the coronavirus likes to infect, right those blood vessels right in the mouth. We actually know that that's another place that's affected by COVID. Now, one of the interesting things is our body also has the ability to regenerate itself from the inside out. So when we were kids, we were taught that starfish and salamanders can regenerate, but people can't, right? Wrong. Turns out that chapter has been ripped out of the textbook and thrown away. The new chapter says that humans can regenerate pretty slowly, but our organs, our hair, our skin, our gut lining, our lungs, our liver, and even our brain can actually regenerate. Now, how does it regenerate? It uses stem cells, not the kind you go to a strip mall for a clinic and pay cash to get injected into your knee. It's the kind that actually comes in our bone marrow. It lives inside the middle of our bone marrow. And when there's an injury or when we need to have our organs repaired, these stem cells come flying out of our bone marrow to repair us and regenerate, renew us from the inside out. So this is called regenerative medicine. This is a starfish. I've been working in this field for almost 30 years. I told you these are the organs that do regenerate. And we know that if you actually have an injury, so this is a study out of Italy of 25 people that had pretty serious burns. They went to the emergency room. In the emergency room, they actually drew their blood to look at how many stem cells on the vertical axis they found in their bloodstream at any given time. And then they admitted the patients into the hospital and they followed them over the course of a month or so, 30 days. And you can kind of see as the patients were healing over the course of a month, more and more and more and more stem cells are called out to help regenerate and heal that tissue until about day 12. And then about halfway through, the stem cells start coming back down as a regeneration that was needed to be done was complete. So this is actually showing you in a human study. And again, this is biotech type of action. This is how we would study regenerative medicine, stem cell therapy for treatment of burn. And by the way, same type of biotech stuff. The worse the burn, go up the vertical axis, you have more and more surface area burn. On the horizontal axis, the more the burn, the more stem cells come pouring out. The body knows how to recover, how to repair itself, how to regenerate itself. So this is really important. The problem is that as we get older, our stem cell activity is lost. And this is really the reason why people go into regenerative medicine, why biotech companies are trying to do this, is diseases of aging, not the brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, heart, limb, after a stroke, after a heart attack, heart failure, kidney failure. Can we regenerate organs, big muscle mass? So lots and lots of biotech questions and enthusiasm for this. But what's interesting is that food can also stimulate your stem cells in a way that, frankly, we don't have the medicines to do yet. So this is actually from Central America. This is the cacao pod. Cacao is a fruit that actually is responsible for cacao nibs or coca, which is used to make chocolate. And so dark chocolate we know is good for our health. And it turns out that dark chocolate's been studied. It's a flavanol. And if you take high flavanols, dark chocolate, 80% or higher, and you make it into hot chocolate and you give it to, in this case, men in their 60s who have known heart disease. Okay, so you give it to men with known heart disease, bad circulation, and you measure at the beginning of the experiment, the study, the research study, their stem cells. You can kind of see they all kind of cluster together, those little red dots, 16 subjects. And then you send them home, you give them 2 cups of hot cocoa a day. And this is the dark chocolate, really dark chocolate. And then you see how they do. A month later, you measure how many stem cells came out. You can see up to doubling of their stem cells, all made by hot cocoa. That's the only thing that happens. So, and so the question is, well, okay, that's fine. You showed there's more cells in the blood. That make a difference at all? Absolutely. So they actually did a clinical test called flow-mediated dilation, where they actually did a blood pressure cuff and they with an ultrasound probe. And guess what they found? Those people who actually had the hot cocoa had better circulation, better adaptive resilience to their blood vessels and their blood flow after a month of having hot cocoa. So food as medicine in the same type of clinical design that we use to look for regenerative medicine. And what about public health? This is the study of 20,000 people from Germany that showed that those who ate 7.5 grams of chocolate a day had a lower risk of cardiovascular disease by quite a substantial amount. So this is the whole series of foods that stimulate angiogenesis. You can read about them more in my book. That's another defense system. And then finally, let me just close by talking about 2 other health defense systems that are intermingled together. And that's our microbiome, responsible for gut health, and our immune system. Now, both of these areas, you may not have heard about angiogenesis. You may not know that much about stem cell therapy, but everybody's kind of heard about gut health, and everybody's thought about immunity, that's out there. Again, I've come at this really from a researcher's perspective and somebody who's worked in the biotech kind of world to try to improve medical treatments. I'm an internal medicine doc. I want to show you these are both actually interconnected. So first of all, the microbiome. 37 trillion healthy bacteria that are actually in our body, mostly in our gut. And they live sort of in our colon. And it turns out that if they live on the inside of the garden hose, in the wall of the garden hose is 70% of our immune system. And so literally these gut bacteria live next door through a thin wall to a majority of our immune system. The analogy I give is, remember in college, if you lived with room in a house, in the bedroom for one college student had a thin wall to the student next door. You could pound on the wall to ask your roommate what kind of pizza they wanted to order, for example, and they could hear you. And that's how bacteria talk to the immune system, and the immune system talk back to the bacteria. Very important concept, because this is one of the ways that our gut microbiome influences our immunity, our inflammatory system. And in addition, these bacteria influence our brain, secretion of social hormones, our lipid metabolism, our ability to heal with growth factors, our stem cells. So many different aspects are influenced by our gut microbiome. This is one of the new frontiers of medicine that's going to occupy researchers for at least another 50 years. It's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter as a field. We're just getting into it right now. And so, for anybody who says, well, I've got the cure for gut disturbance, I'm just telling you that the real truth in health is that we're just at the beginning of this whole new frontier to understand the microbiome. So 3 strategies that currently exist to support microbiome health defenses: give prebiotics, probiotics, and avoid things that can damage your microbiome. So here's some surprises. Kiwi is a good probiotic. It's got a lot of vitamin C, which is good for your gut microbiome. It's also got a ton of fiber. And so this is a study out of Singapore where they actually wanted to test out, if you just gave somebody 2 kiwis a day, what would actually happen? And if you measure the gut bacteria by looking at the poop, the stool, so this is actually fecal microbiome studies that are done classically now. It's actually a type of research that's commonly done. Just eating 2 kiwis a day, not changing anything else, increased good health gut bacteria in 24 hours by 35%. And over the course of 4 days, a different bacteria grew by 17%. These bacteria produce short chain fatty acids that are lower inflammation, that help your cholesterol and lipids work better, that improve your energy metabolism, and actually help your gut secrete mucus. So it doesn't take much to actually influence this. And it's really important. Fermented foods like cabbages, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, even some forms of cheese actually can add good bacteria into our gut. And even sourdough bread actually has a gut bacteria called Lactobacillus reuteri that can actually be helpful as well. In fact, this Lactobacillus reuteri in sourdough bread, humans have been eating this for so many hundreds of years that the actual bacteria, which originally came from the human gut, has adapted to bread dough. And now it has its own bread dough version of it. And it's been shown that Lactobacillus reuteri can actually suppress the development of tumors in the breast. So again, another powerful way, and this is sort of, this is work that a colleague of mine has done at MIT looking at this. So the question is, you show me some bacteria in bread, when you bake the bread, you can actually kill the bacteria, right? Yes, that's correct. You kill the bacteria, but even the fragments of the bacteria still can act on the brain in this case and help the brain release oxytocin, which is a social hormone. This is the hormone you get when you see a friend, you give a hug to somebody, you give a kiss. It's also the hormone that the brain releases during orgasm. And so again, powerful concept that the gut bacteria is useful, and even the fragments of the gut bacteria can be helpful. And this is actually showing the oxytocin in people that are given Lactobacillus reuteri. But even if the bacteria are sheared apart, it still works. So that's really quite an amazing thing. Lots of foods that beneficially affect the microbiome. At this point, let me also say that lots of things can affect the microbiome in a negative way. The ones that I would actually tell you, red meat and processed meats, actually with lots of preservatives and chemicals, can damage the microbiome. Artificial sweeteners actually been shown to damage the microbiome as quickly as 24 hours after you have a diet soda. Your microbiome can change in a negative way. And ultra-processed foods, stuff in a box, the ingredients which are hard to read, also been shown to damage the microbiome as well. So things that you've heard about, but now I'm giving you a different perspective to understand why that's actually so. So now, how is the microbiome connected to the immune system, and how do we know that it actually works? Well, it turns out that President Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, the oldest living president, actually after his presidency, wound up actually building houses, Habitat for Humanity in Georgia under the hot Georgian sun. He got melanoma, and eventually that melanoma had spread to his liver and his brain. Now, for anybody, that would actually be a terminal diagnosis. It's unsurvivable to have melanoma spread to your brain. However, as he was in his 90s and this was happening to him, he wound up getting into a clinical trial of an immunotherapy. And an immunotherapy is a cancer therapy that doesn't kill the cancer directly, but it rips the cloak off of a tumor so that your immune system, or in President Carter's case, his 90-year-old immune system, could find that tumor. So even if you're 90, your immune system is powerful enough to find and destroy cancers. And after he got that treatment, he had a complete response, and he's still alive today with absolutely no sign of cancer. He had written his obituary and then ripped it up. So this is not President Carter, but this is the kind of thing where you'd have metastatic cancer before treatment in the red circle, and after an immunotherapy. There's no chemo here. The only thing that happened is that the treatment actually ripped the cloak off of the tumor so that your immune system can find it and destroy it. Like I told you, we all have microscopic tumors. The reason they're not harmful is because our immune system will eventually wipe them out. We can actually prompt the body to do this. This is biotech, immunotherapy. Now, turns out not everybody responds that way. And for a long time, we didn't really know what made somebody respond versus what made somebody not respond. It turns out the gut microbiome, absolutely critical. If you have the right gut bacteria, you can respond to immunotherapy. If you don't have the right bacteria in your gut, you won't respond because your immune system isn't being prompted by the right bacteria. And by not responding, you could have a really bad outcome. And this was done by my colleague, Dr. Laurence Zitvogel out of Paris. And she studied 200 patients with cancer who were getting treated with immunotherapy, and then tried to look at all the differences. And the only difference that was found, meaningful difference that was found, was one bacteria in the gut microbiome. And that gut bacteria is called Akkermansia muciniphila. Akkermansia muciniphila. This bacteria, when it's present, talks to the immune system and prompts it and enables it to destroy cancer. And it's very easy to get rid of this bacteria. If you take a Z-Pak, for example, to treat bronchitis, that's enough to actually wipe out that bacteria. So how do you actually build it back? Because you can't eat that as a probiotic. The only way you can get Akkermansia is with food. It turns out pomegranates and cranberries help your gut secrete mucus that bacteria likes to go to. This food, pomegranate and cranberries and Concord grapes, actually are like the fertilizer that helps this bacteria grow back up. So this has now been published in lots of different journals. Dietary factors can improve Akkermansia, which is an important bacteria that talks to your immune system, that helps cancer immunotherapy go. And this is basically, if you were to look at the cells, you have some pomegranate influences the mucus, the bacteria, the microbiome grow, influences the immune system. And if you're getting immunotherapy in a bag, which is it's hung up like a bag, and it gets in there, that immunotherapy is going to allow those immune cells to actually find the cancer and destroy it. Why am I showing you this? Because that bag of immunotherapy belonged to my mother, who actually had metastatic endometrial cancer spread throughout the body, really terminal type of situation normally. And what we were able to do is get her, find the smoking guns that would allow her to get the immunotherapy, and then we gave her pomegranate, we gave her cranberries in order to be able to get that gut mucus, Akkermansia growing, and she was a complete responder. And so all of the cancer was gone. She's alive to this day, doing very, very well with no evidence of cancer. So I never thought in my career I would actually ever see this kind of progress happening in cancer. And I never imagined that I'd be able to actually apply that to my own mother. And I never imagined that food, diet, nutrition, food as medicine would actually be helpful as well. Now, that wasn't food or medicine. That was food and medicine. And that's actually an important concept because, a lot of people say, well, never mind medicine. It's really about natural stuff. I'm telling you, as a medical doctor who's involved with biotechnology, we can combine food and medicine together. These are tools in a toolbox. One isn't better than the other. They're all things that we should actually be using in thinking about it. So we have vaccines now against COVID. And we now know that foods are actually important as well. Now, let me just give you a little bit of knowledge about, or share with some information about what I learned in terms of my knowledge about food and how it relates to COVID. Well, first of all, we know that foods can make vaccines work better, and everybody's getting a vaccine these days because that's how we get to the light at the end of the tunnel. Turns out studies have been done for influenza vaccines. This is not a COVID vaccine, but eating broccoli sprouts can actually improve the performance of a vaccine. 2 cups of broccoli sprouts a day in a shake in a healthy volunteer getting a flu vaccine can increase your response of your immune cells by 22 times. It's the only difference compared to a placebo. And when you actually look for the flu virus in those shake eaters for broccoli sprouts, they almost had no virus left in their nose when you're actually swabbing the nose. So very, very important, this idea of food that might be able to enhance vaccine responses. That's an area of research that is actually underway. This is also showing an impact on food on COVID itself. This was actually published in July of 2020, looking at 900 patients that all were normally healthy, and then they went on to follow them to see which ones are going to develop COVID, and they've managed to measure their blood, their stool, the poop, to look for the microbiome, and they also got what they ate. And so what they found is that the people who actually wound up not getting COVID had more blood level of a natural virus killer called interferon gamma. Those people who had more interferon gamma had a natural bacteria, a couple of natural bacteria in the gut microbiome, lactobacillus and ruminococcus, 2 bacteria that were found in elevated at higher levels in people who made the natural virus killer. And who actually had the lactobacillus and ruminococcus, those healthy gut bacteria? People who ate or drank more tea, green tea or black tea, or ate more seafood. So again, this was sort of real time, real in the middle of the pandemic, trying to use these same tools to try to tease apart what was actually going on in the body, and how do you connect it to the microbiome, which is the defense system, the immune system, interferon gamma, and how does that connect to food as well? So lots of really interesting things still to be done in this area of food as medicine. How do you actually, so again, interferon gamma was the protectant, the virus killer. Lactobacillus was one of the healthy bacteria. Tea, EGCG, which is a catechin found in tea, green tea, or black tea, they found was one of them. And then also looking at seafood as well. So I'll just close with this quote from Hippocrates, since I started with Hippocrates, who did say this. And what he wrote was that natural forces within us are the true healers of disease. And if we knew that thousands of years ago, we're now quite sure of that now, because what we know is that the body is hardwired with our health defense systems are born with. From the time we emerge on this planet to our very last breath, these 5 health defense systems, angiogenesis, stem cells, microbiome, DNA protection, and our immune systems are firing on all cylinders, helping us resist disease. And now we're beginning to do the research using food to find food as medicine, to look for how foods activate our health defenses. And with that, I'll take a few questions. Thank you.
Dr. Lee, thank you so much. This is Ben again from The Real Truth About Health. That was informative and enlightening. And what can I say? I know everybody was thrilled to find out the great news about your mom as well. So everybody, you can see Dr. Lee's website information on the screen right now. Thank you so much. Yes, we'd love to have a Q&A session with you now. So thank you for that. What we're going to do, just a little bit of housekeeping to make sure everybody's on the same page. Couple of things. Number one, we're not able to answer questions that are typed in the chat box. So we ask everybody to raise their hand. In case you don't know how to do that, you go ahead, you click the reactions button in your Zoom window. And on there, there's a little raise hand button. You click that and we will see your hands raised. I can see a lot of hands raised already are coming in, which is great. We're going to get to as many questions as we possibly can in our allotted time. Here's what we need to ask you. Please keep it to one question. There's a lot of people that want to ask questions. We want to have enough room for everybody. So please, just one question for Dr. Lee. Also, keep it brief, keep it direct, and make sure it's something that you think everybody might be interested in hearing the information about. So that said, we'll go ahead and get moving. Dr. Lee, you ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and ask the person with the initials DF to unmute. DF, if you can go ahead and unmute, what's your question for Dr. William Lee?
Hi, Dr. Lee. Thanks for the presentation. That was awesome. My question is about IGF-1. I read something that IGF-1 promotes cell growth, unfortunately, cancer cell growth. Is there any IGF-1 in plant foods, or does it matter whether it's the amount in whatever food? What matters is what our liver, how much our liver produces. So thank you.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, thank you for that question. And I'm not able to give medical advice in this context, but I will tell you that IGF-1 is actually insulin growth factor 1 for everyone, and it's actually a body that it's actually a protein that our body naturally produces as part of health. Even though we read about it and hear about it, and it's actually lectured about as sort of something that's overproduced and a target for treating disease. In fact, it's incredibly important. It's involved with insulin regulation, so it's involved with the metabolism. And yeah, it's involved with cell growth. Our body is able to control levels of IGF-1, and we want to keep our body's ability to control IGF-1 at its normal level. Foods don't really have human IGF-1. It's a human protein, so foods actually don't have enough of it to activate us. But foods that can kind of influence our gut bacteria can actually influence our lipids, and our lipid metabolism, and our fat in our body can actually produce IGF-1. So this is a kind of the connection between the foods we eat, mostly plant-based, high fiber whole foods, actually can help our gut microbiome, which then helps control our lipids, which then interacts with our fat and adipose tissue, which then helps to smooth out what our IGF-1 does. We don't want to get rid of most of these proteins. We want to keep them in balance.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. And up next, we have Deb. Deb, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself for Dr. William Lee.
Yes, hi, Dr. Lee. I really enjoyed your book, Eat to Beat Disease, and I'm a big fan. I had a question with regard to ivermectin relating to COVID and what your thoughts are.
Right. So the question is, again, I'm not able to give medical advice, but everybody's looking for a COVID treatment. I mean, from day one, whether you're a researcher like me, or people in government, or drug companies, or people who are out there, cleaning out drugstore shelves and dietary supplements. Interestingly, ivermectin is a medicine that shows a lot of promise. And it actually seems to work by interfering with the binding of the virus to its receptor ACE2. It also lowers inflammation. And the reason it got to be interesting was because many people who were suffering an infection, like with Lyme disease, are treated with ivermectin. This is repurposed in treating long-term and chronic Lyme disease, and they actually seem to improve. And so there were lots of smaller studies being done. Lots of people were taking ivermectin. Doctors were writing ivermectin prescriptions, and clinical trials are actually being done as well. As you probably know from everything you've been reading about COVID, running clinical trials is really, really difficult because we don't even know exactly how to get the same patients at the same place and at the same time to figure out how to actually get a really good control group. But ivermectin is a pretty safe drug. I mean, if you have a pet dog, the dog's vet gives ivermectin to control heartworm, for example. And so it's one of those really interesting areas that the FDA has also taken an interest in a positive way, to ask, are there drugs that can be repurposed that are inexpensive? And if you think about what's going on today around the world, like in India, in other parts of the world, I heard from a colleague in Turkey today, their case rate is also going out of control. They don't have all the bells and whistles that we are fortunate to have here. How can we actually find affordable, inexpensive, safe medications or interventions that can be helpful to them? And that's actually where applying the science to things like ivermectin are important. Now, just to put a footnote on there, don't forget hydroxychloroquine also was sort of a savior drug at one point. It takes science and it takes time to really sort all this out. Thank you for asking the question.
Thanks, Dr. Lee. Up next, we have Cheryl. Cheryl, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, thank you, Ben. Hi, Dr. Lee. Thank you so much for all you do. I have your list of cancer-fighting foods on my refrigerator. And my question is it ever too late to use these foods as cancer treatment For example, if somebody's 85 and they have double hit lymphoma and they've been on chemo for a year already, is it too late to try a dietary intervention with the foods that you recommend?
Yeah, so the question really is, is there a point at which foods are not going to be useful in helping to prompt our body to resist cancer, to control blood vessels growing to the cancer? So anti-angiogenesis, starving to cancer, targeting the stem cells from which cancers, including lymphomas, can grow, get right-sizing our gut microbiome so the ecosystem is able to lower inflammation, which can provoke cancer, protect our DNA from having more mutations because cancer is driven by mutations, and also to help support our immune system so that even if we are elderly and even if we're battling cancer, even if we've had treatment, our immune system is still working on our side. We haven't dismissed them. We haven't sent them home yet. They're still ready to rock and to help us defend against the disease. And the answer is you are never too old to use nutrition to fortify your body's defenses. That is the one thing that never gives up is our body's defenses. The one thing is that they can get weaker as we get older, and they can even get weaker with some treatments like chemo. So that's double the reason to actually try to eat the foods that can help support them. I want to underscore what I am saying is not to replace cancer treatments that your doctor might prescribe using food, but rather to use food as something that you can help yourself with at a nutrition level to support your health defenses between doctor's office visits. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Doctor. Up next, we have somebody with the initials appropriately, MD. MD, if we can have your question.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lee, I know you cannot give medical advice, but my question is more of an approach. So for example, I'm working with a good friend that has an adrenal tumor that is related to Cushing's. And so there's some seriousness with regards to high blood pressure, et cetera. I've talked to about 10 different doctors and everybody, wants to do the surgery. My question is, even if that is required, my question always is, can we look at other approaches? And the very arrogant answer I get is, nope, there's nothing else you can do. And then I say, isn't there a way for this thing to reduce? If it can grow, can't it go down? Can it go the other way? And this friend of mine actually has been doing, nutritional kinds of therapy for years and years. So that wasn't, that's still ongoing. So my question is, how do you find a healthcare provider, with the internet and everything, trying to go out there, do the searches, do the telehealth? It's very, very difficult. I know there's a way, but I thought maybe you had an approach to find maybe someone that would talk to us about angiogenesis, which, by the way, is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so again, without giving medical advice, let me maybe share with you and for everyone where the future of medicine is coming when it comes to cancer. And this is something that I'm actually quite involved with now. So I know that it's not just science fiction, but it's science fact. Somebody with a tumor, regardless of what type of tumor is, regardless of where it is, the playbook says if you can remove it with surgery, remove it with surgery. If you can't remove it with surgery, you got medicines, and it ranges from chemo to targeted therapy to immunotherapy. So that, those are sort of the standard playbook approaches. In the future, how we're going to treat every cancer is we're going to actually get a biopsy of the cancer, not just to identify the type of cancer it is, whether it's a liver cancer, a colon cancer, a brain tumor, adrenal tumor, you name the cancer, could be any. And then what we do is we send it to a lab to do full genome analysis, where you basically, it's like a crime scene investigation, CSI, you look at all the genes, 30,000 human genes, and you look at every single one of the tumor. And then you also get a blood draw from the same person with normal healthy cells, like white blood cells, and you do the exact same thing. Now you got 30,000 normal genes studied from a normal cell and 30,000 genes from the tumor. And then you use artificial intelligence, because the human brain can't do it, 30,000 versus 30,000, back and forth, which ones are only in the tumor, which ones are not in actually the normal cell. And when you do that, you let the machine chug, right? It spits out which are the mutations that are found only in the tumor. It doesn't matter what tumor it is. Frankly, it doesn't even matter where the tumor came from. Once you know what those mutations are, you can then use a database to decide if there are any existing medicines that can hit those targets. Okay, and the next part is, and this is like, wait for it. This is the exciting part. You can take those mutations that are found only in the tumor, not in the healthy cells, and you can actually move those mutations onto a computer screen. Okay, like a Photoshop computer screen. You can stitch them together, like make a pearl necklace diagrammatically on the screen, and then you could hit print, and you can have a 3D printer print those proteins, let's say 10 or 20 proteins that are only present in that tumor as a protein that's stitched together like a pearl necklace. You get a little powder, little vial powder, and then you take that powder and you inject it under the skin of the patient, and now you can vaccinate the patient against their own cancer. And so this is really what is going to be the future. I mean, I can tell you that this is coming. It's the most natural thing you can think about. I mean, we're talking about, if you can actually immunize yourself against HPV to prevent cervical cancer, in the future, we're going to be able to immunize ourselves against the cancer that was taken out of your own body. And so I wouldn't stress so much about the surgery versus the chemo versus the anti-angio. If you go to any academic medical center, actually, there's a little trick here. Clinicaltrials.gov, clinicaltrials.gov, is a search engine. If you type up angiogenesis and whatever tumor you're interested in and look at all the clinical trials, at the bottom of the list will be the medical centers where they're conducting those trials. You can then call the medical center and figure out if they're taking patients. That's probably my strategy that I would actually recommend.
Wow. Thank you for that, doctor. And up next is Sonia. Sonia, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Hi, Sonia, are you there? We're just waiting. There you go.
I'm here. Oh my God. First of all, I got to tell you, Dr. Lee, I have followed you since you were on Dr. Oz with the scanner that you used about antioxidants. You are one of my rock stars. I've been in the nutritional business for over 20 years. I almost was going to work with Gerson therapies and help people. I mean, I've been really into this for a long period of time. So you may have just answered my question, because my question was based on basal cell cancers and angiogenesis, and the information that I've been getting for prevention or slowing that down with natural substances is just basically a large range of different foods that cover the orange, which are the beta carotenes, or maybe the lycopene areas. I was just curious to know if you've run across anything that you can say on a clinical trial in that particular case of skin cancer, basal cell.
Yeah, so, and this is going to be the last question I'm able to answer, but thank you, Sonia, for the question. Basically, the skin is one of the most vulnerable areas for damage to our DNA, because what happens, right? We go outside. I mean, forget about people that go into tanning salons. Forget about people that burn on the beach by, coating their bodies in olive oil. People who are alert and to health don't do that kind of stuff very much anymore. But if you're stuck in traffic, on a highway on a sunny day with the window down, that sun is coming in, you're still getting ultraviolet radiation, which then makes our skin one of the most vulnerable places, our face, our exposed surfaces, to being able to actually develop common skin cancers like basal cell cancer. Now, basal cell cancer is actually, classic. It's not a lethal cancer. That generally doesn't kill you, but it can be quite serious, and it can grow in areas that you don't want it to grow. And so the traditional things to do are to cut it out or burn it out or freeze it. But those, that can be disfiguring, and it's a lot of trouble. And because your whole face, for example, got exposed by the ultraviolet radiation, it's called field cancerization. The entire field's been damaged. So one of the things that we're looking at is, how do you actually not just do piecemeal, spot treatments, but how can you treat that whole area? There are creams that are used, and so I'm just citing a research paper that uses a cream called Aldera or imiquimod that actually you spread it on and it upregulates your immune system to go after the skin cancers, and that works, and it's been FDA approved for that. But what's interesting, and it raises the idea that we can actually use immune boosting foods as well. And it makes me think, as you're talking about this, not only eating foods that actually help your immune system, but also foods that can support your gut microbiome so that you can attack a skin cancer, not just from the top down with the cream, but from the bottom up, from inside, using your own immune system to lower inflammation, increase those natural immune cancer finders and seekers and killers, but to also be able to treat a larger area by having your immune system just cover all that stuff, because that 60,000 miles of blood vessels I told you about with angiogenesis, your immune super soldiers are actually racing through there, covering all that skin as well. So I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak to you, and it's a real pleasure to be a part. Thank you, Ben, for your introduction.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for being here with us today. As everyone can see on the screen, go to drwilliamlee.com for more. This has been just incredible, and we're so grateful. In fact, I want to thank you personally, but I got to tell you, I think there's a few other people that want to thank you as well. Tech team, if you'd go ahead and unmute everybody. What do you think, everybody? How was Dr. Lee today?
Thanks,
Well,
Dr. Lee.
fantastic.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.